Hello, welcome to The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by our partners talkSPORT Bet. You know by now, this is our daily show where we bring you up to date with all the goings on in the transfer window, the moves, the rumours and everything in between. My name is Fergus Macphee, and today we're doing another one of our stats deep dives, and joining me to do that, I'm delighted to say, is David Segar from Opta Analyst. David, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us on The Window.
I'm doing very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, I think there's only one place to start, especially as if it's not a giveaway from the pictures behind you, you are a Liverpool fan. So let's start with your club and Alexander Isak. Now, Newcastle boss Eddie Howe has said that Isak's future is not in his control. He's been heavily linked to Liverpool. How are you managing to contain your excitement?
Barely, but admittedly, it still feels like it's quite a long way away because Newcastle, it seems like, holds quite a lot of power in this. Obviously, he's got 3 years left on his deal. Liverpool have already somewhat stolen Hugo Ekitike from them, so I don't think Newcastle are particularly happy about that. So that might make negotiations a bit trickier again, but it sounds like the player wants to move, but whether Newcastle will relent, they absolutely don't have to. He's their player, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, as you say, there's still a long way to go if this transfer does go through. From a purely stats perspective, if he did sign for Liverpool, we know they've already got pretty much a whole new fresh attack. Is it a case of just let's hand them the Premier League trophy now?
I mean, it's never quite that simple. I think we've seen in the past with teams who have gone big in the transfer window. We know that it's a bit of a thing these days where people almost look at a transfer window as a separate season. So there's this infamous thing of winning the transfer window, which I really disagree with, because the transfer window is dependent on how those players do, not how they look on paper. So, but that's me trying to be level-headed as a Liverpool fan. I have to say that you do look at it on paper and you think, well, we won the league last year with relative ease in the end, and have added a lot of very, very talented players in the summer. So if Isak were to come in as well, on top of the likes of Florian Wirtz and Milos Kerkez, Jeremy Frimpong and Ekitike, that, yeah, in theory, it makes Liverpool stronger again. Obviously, you've lost Trent Alexander-Arnold. Looks like Luis Diaz is going as well. Obviously, the tragic incident with Diogo Jota. So they're going to be weaker in certain areas, but it looks like they're strengthening quite heavily in others. But it certainly wouldn't be a case for handing them the title, but expectations would be raised further, even though they're already the defending champions.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. And you mentioned that new attack. We've all seen Isak play. We know how he plays. How would he fit into Liverpool's style of play? Or do we not know yet with that sort of new attack of Wirtz, Ekitike, and then possibly Isak?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing, I guess, because I think when Liverpool signed Ekitike, everyone, myself included, thought, oh, okay, well, they're not getting Isak then, because they'll play Ekitike as the striker down the middle. Now, I know Liverpool's interest in Isak goes back quite a long way, and I think it might be an element of specifically him, because he's so good. They're willing to maybe make some amendments to the way Arne Slot sets his team up, just because it's potentially a once in a decade whatever opportunity. I think if they missed out on him, I don't necessarily think they'd go and sign another striker. I think they'd probably pivot and maybe go for a winger instead. Would potentially, Darwin Núñez is still around. Maybe they'd just say, well, if we can't get Isak, maybe we keep Núñez around for another season and invest that money in a Diaz replacement potentially. But if Isak were to come through the door, I would certainly obviously expect him to play as a 9 through the middle. I know he did play on the left a few times in Newcastle, but it was really interesting to hear Ekitike say in his introductory interview at the club, he made a point of saying that he likes playing with a strike partner, and he also feels like he can play in various positions. So, to be honest, I haven't seen him play much away from the number 9. He played on the wing a little bit at PSG, and it didn't work. So that's not necessarily the best advert. But it's, with Arne Slot, you just don't know, because last summer, if you'd said to me that he was going to play Ryan Gravenberch as a 6, I'd have called you crazy. So it's who knows? He might turn Ekitike into a world-class left winger. But yeah, it's in terms of how the impact Isak would have on the team. I mean, it feels almost a little silly to try and back up buying Isak with data, because everyone who's seen him play knows how good he is, how many goals he scored. He got only Mo Salah. It scored more goals last season in the Premier League, got more goal contributions. So you add Isak to that, and then of course the creativity of Florian Wirtz, who was one of the most creative players in Europe last season and in recent seasons, and yeah, it's difficult to see how it would be a failure if he were to come in.
Are we saying that Liverpool could be bringing back 4-4-2, two up top for next season?
In a certain guise, maybe. I don't think it'd be quite that. It wouldn't be like a Sabutio setup, 4-4-2 exactly. I don't think, but with especially with Wirtz, I mean, I would imagine he's going to play as a 10. So yeah, I think it would likely be that if he played Ekitike and Isak at the same time, probably one would, by Ekitike likely would be the de facto left-sided forward, but probably would mostly drift inside and essentially be a second striker most of the time. Because obviously with signing Milos Kerkez, he provides so much width down that side, just bombs up and down. He could probably just be the entire left side in certain games. So yeah, I think it's going to be an element of horses for courses. Of course, Liverpool last season won the Premier League, but they were disappointed to go out in the Champions League of the last 16. Didn't go very far in the FA Cup. So I know this season, obviously, especially with the money they're spending, you would think the expectations would be there that they will go for every trophy. And if that's the case, they're going to play about 65 games up to. So they're going to need a squad to get through that. So I don't think looking at what would their main starting 11 be is particularly relevant, because I think it's going to change quite a lot.
Like you said, we all know what Isak can do. We'll get into a couple of other strikers who are on the market in the moment. But when you look at maybe other strikers around the world, is Isak right up there statistically with the best of them at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's an argument he might be potentially even the best striker in the world. It's depending on what you're looking at. A lot of people understandably would say, well, Erling Haaland is the best striker in the world. And of course, you look at him and the goals he scores, and it's very difficult to argue with that. But if you were looking for maybe a more all-round striker, what Isak does off the ball as well, and his creativity, he's got 10 assists for Newcastle. Since he arrived in the Premier League, got over 60 goals. So yeah, he's goal contributions pretty much guaranteed. But I think with the price tag that's being mentioned, you would expect a player who is one of the best strikers in the world. But yeah, he's absolutely up there. And of course, he's a pretty good age as well. He's turns 26 fairly soon, I think, possibly in September. So yeah, I think with Liverpool is a case of probably get him now before he gets closer to his late 20s, and maybe that value isn't there to the extent that it would be now. But as I said, I think it's going to be a really difficult one to do, especially if Newcastle struggle to get a replacement in.
Well, you've teed that up perfectly there. We'll move on to his current club. And, if he does leave, as you say, they are going to need a replacement. One of the names heavily linked at the moment is Benjamin Sesko. It's reportedly wanted by both Newcastle and Manchester United. Would he fit in well at either club?
I think he would. I mean, it's been a bit of a strange one with strikers this summer, of course. It's almost been like there's been this agreed list of like 5 or 6 strikers, and then the clubs who need strikers, and then there's like a matching game.
Arsenal fans watching will need no intro to Benjamin Sesko.
Yeah. Victor Gyökeres is a fine match. But yeah, with Sesko, it does sort of feel like he was the last one on the dance floor, if you know what I mean, like the one left without a partner. But I don't think that diminishes him in any way. I think he's an excellent striker. There's a reason why he was on that list and why every big club was looking at him, even if he wasn't necessarily their first choice. He's someone who's been, I think, on the radar for quite a while. He was really impressive at Salzburg. He's been in that Red Bull system since 2019. He went on loan to FC Liefering at one point where he did well, and then he had a very, very good season in the Austrian Bundesliga, and then moved sideways to RB Leipzig in the Bundesliga, and yeah, he had two pretty good seasons there. He's not a volume goal scorer yet, I wouldn't say. He got 14 goals in his first season, 13 last season. He did add more assists last season, but at the moment he's possibly a scorer of great goals rather than a great goal scorer, but he is still only 22. I think fairly recently turned 22 as well, so it feels like that would come with time. And he's one of those where with the eye test, you just look at him and you're like, there's definitely a player in there. You can just tell sometimes, even if the numbers aren't there, that just the way he is, the things he can do, that few other players can at that age, that he's likely to turn into a very good player. But whether he'd fit in at Newcastle or Man United, I'd say probably Newcastle will make a little more sense if Isak were to go, just because he would have that guaranteed he would be the main starter in that team. And we know, obviously, with the success of Isak, Eddie Howe's teams are built around having that striker who is the main part of everything in attack. Signing Anthony Elanga as well. I think he'd enjoy playing with him with the creativity he brings. And yeah, so I think it would be a sensible signing for either Newcastle or United.
Yeah, how similar in profile do you think he might be to Isak if he does go? You even mentioned there, how he's young. Maybe it's a little bit of a gamble. I mean, you could argue we sort of saw the same with Isak, and then 3 years later he became an absolute world beater.
Yeah, this is it. It's difficult not to draw parallels with Isak because they say similar age, similar part of his career. Isak had played in the Bundesliga as well with Borussia Dortmund, albeit not for very long. Went to Real Sociedad and did well there. But interestingly, with Sesko's numbers saying like he's not scoring a lot of goals yet, Isak the season before Newcastle signed him, and people sort of forget this because they signed him for big money, and obviously he's been incredible. So there's this idea of like, oh well, they just signed a really good striker and he was really good. That's not a surprise. But the season before he went to Newcastle, he scored 6 goals in 32 La Liga games for Real Sociedad, and he had a shot conversion rate of 8.2%, I think it was, which is awful, really awful. And so yeah, for Newcastle to still take a risk on him, I think speaks a lot to the faith they had in him and not paying too much attention to those big numbers. They probably looked at the underlying stats and thought, well, there's clearly a player in there. Again, I remember watching Isak at Euro 2020 with Sweden and thinking looks an unbelievable talent. And so it was a surprise to see him maybe not score more at Real Sociedad, but then Newcastle bring him in. A little bit of a introductory season where I think he had injuries. He didn't play an awful lot, scored 10 goals in that first season, but then obviously exploded in that second season and was phenomenal again last season. So not saying Sesko would follow the same trajectory, obviously, but there's a lot of raw talent there to work with, and Newcastle have already proven they're very good at taking a striker from that level to the level Isak's at now. So yeah, I'd be confident that he'd be a success.
And now Isak is potentially worth £130 million. So I'll ask, I know you're not an economist, but what in your mind might be a good price for Sesko? I know when Arsenal were looking at him, they were sort of talking about maybe 90 million euros. It seems to have fallen now maybe to more like 80 million euros. Is that still a lot of money?
It is, but then I suppose it's relative to the market. I mean, I'm someone who believes that pretty much no football should cost more than £50 million. I'm a bit old school like that. But hearing these numbers over Isak is making my eyes water. But in terms of compared to the rest of the market, obviously you look at what Liverpool spent on Ekitike, who I'd say is again probably similar in his development with Sesko. So you'd probably use that as a barometer. So yeah, 70-80 feels about right. I think Ekitike's probably proven himself a little more as an all-round player, which might be why Liverpool went for him over Sesko. But I saw reports last few days that I think Leipzig have brought their asking price down a little bit from where Arsenal were. I don't know how Arsenal feel about that if they moved away from Sesko because they were being quoted 90 and then see Newcastle getting for 70 and think, hang on.
We don't know the specifics of that deal, but it kind of seemed like from the reports Arsenal were priced out and that now he's being made available.
And now the price is coming down. Now they've already got the other guy. But relative to the market, I think 70 is probably about right. And that's only a little more than they paid for Isak 3 years ago. And obviously bringing inflation to that, it's probably a cheaper deal than that, and they would probably back themselves to say, well, 3 years time, if one of the other clubs wants to come for Sesko, that's going to be 150 to 200 as well if he's the success with us that we think he's going to be.
All right, just finally then we'll go on to Manchester United. Still talking about Benjamin Sesko. We've spoken about him. He's the more sort of young profile of talent. They're also looking at Ollie Watkins, a little bit older, Premier League proven. How would you compare the two strikers?
I'd say, to be honest, and this is not meant to be a slight on Manchester United, even though it will sound it given my leanings, but they're really different. So it doesn't make an awful lot of sense that they're going for one or the other. But I do. Having said that, I do think Watkins would make sense for Man United in that they obviously with Cunha and Bumo already through the door, they've shown that Premier League proven is important to them, and Watkins definitely is that. He's been excellent at Aston Villa, even last season, and it feels a bit weird to me that he might leave Villa. I know they didn't have a brilliant end to the season, but there was this sort of feeling that, maybe he's been edged out by Duran, and then he left, and then Rashford came in, and then it felt like he was being dropped for him quite a lot. But he did still make 43 starts last season and plays over 50 games in all. So he was still heavily involved. He got the most goal contributions for Villa last season with 31. So I think he's one of those players, if you brought him in, obviously United haven't had great success in recent times with Højlund and Xerxes coming in from Serie A. Not to say that players from Serie A don't generally work, but it hasn't done with those two. So that Premier League proven aspect, I think, would be very important to them. There's the age profile as well. The fact he's, I think, 7 years older than Sesko.
He is.
So you're not buying him for the future, you're buying him for the now. And so, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's possibly what United need. And there's also an interesting stat my colleague Ryan Benson found the other day, which was that last season in the Premier League, only Brian and Mbeumo made more runs in behind the opposition defence than Watkins. So if you were to have the two players who do that more often than anyone else did last season in the Premier League, and you've got obviously Bruno Fernandes who can pick anyone out from anywhere, and Cunha as well, who's obviously very creative, then it sounds in theory like that would make sense.
We'll be watching that closely, as with everything else here on the window and talkSPORT. But for now, David Segar from Opta, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, thank you.